Today we're going to be talking about the Accuquilt cutting system. This is a system that allows you to cut your pieces absolutely perfectly and get you sewing faster so you can get your project underway in a much more timely manner. So let's talk about what is the Accuquilt cutting system. So what it is a cutter of your choice and dies. And how these dies work, first I'm going to open up, this is the Accuquilt Go, and it's a hand crank machine. And what we're going to do is take our die, and you can see the shapes in the different color foam here. And around these shapes, there is a blade, a cutting blade, kind of like a cookie cutter for fabric. And that is going to cut our shapes for us. So you can see where your fabric should be placed based on the colored foam. So I'm going to cut this fabric right here, these two pieces, and then just put the cutting mat over the top. So now what you do is you have your machine, and the machine has rollers in here that will push down on the surface of the mat as it goes through. And as it pushes down, the blades push through the fabric into the cutting mat and will cut your shapes out for you. So very, very easy. And so you'll see here, I'm going to rub my hand over that, just removes the static electricity. And then here's our little pieces, and the half square triangles even have the dog ears cut off, so you don't have that extra mess around your sewing machine, and you also don't have to take that time. And another thing about it is that it's exactly where your 1/4 inch seam allowance should be, so you know right where to stitch. So that is the premise of how the Accuquilt works. So what kind of machine would work for you? Well, maybe you like the idea of the hand crank, and that's a wonderful system. We have a 10-inch path here, so it can take most every die. It can take all of the cubes, which we'll talk about in a minute. It also folds up so you could put it on a shelf. It weighs less than 15 pounds, so you could just pop it on a shelf and store it that way. And when you're ready to use it, you just open it up, and then you run your dies through. Now, if you are a person who doesn't want to be limited by size, we have the Go Big, and this has a 14-inch path, and it can take every single die that is made. So it can take small ones, and it can take the really big ones. So you're not limited on size on this one. And when you use this guy, I'll just show you how he works. We'll just put another piece of fabric right on there. So when you want to do this one, you simply insert it, and the motor will turn it for you and send it through. So you don't have to worry about if you have any elbow or shoulder or carpal tunnel or wrist issues, you don't have anything to turn or crank. It does it for you. So again, we can just remove the static electricity best we can, slide that off, and we have our pieces cut. So it's just really, really an easy way to go about getting your pieces cut. So do you want to have unlimited size capabilities and let the machine do it for you? Or would you like one that you can hand crank and use this way? Both of them, I should mention, can be placed on a shelf. So this one also folds up and stores just like that. And I keep mine on the top on a bookshelf for storage, and then I just open it up when I'm ready to use it. And I'm going to go ahead and slip this down for a few minutes so we can talk about other things about cutting with the machine. So now let's talk about the basics of using your fabric with the dies. So a lot of people think that this is very wasteful, but it's actually not, because you can use scraps of fabric, and you can also have them just the right size for whatever die you're working with. You're going to notice, though, that the dies seem to be cattywampus on the board, and that is because, it's on purpose, it is because when you send it through the machine, if it just starts with a little bit, then it can work into getting the rest of the die. If it worked straight on, it would be like a big speed bump, 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 and it would have maybe a little bit of hesitation, or who knows what, but it's just easier if you go at an angle. And so that's why these are at an angle. But when you place your fabric on them, you want them to be aligned with the dies, not the die board. Okay, so you want your fabric to look kittywampus as well. So now let's talk about the fabric for a minute. The fabric, when you run it through the machine, I'm going to be putting it in this way. You want the length of grain to be going the same direction as you're feeding the dye in. And that's important because the length of grain is more stable than the cross grain. Cross grain has a little bit of stretch to it, but the straight grain doesn't. And then it's going to be more stable as it runs through the machine. So how are you going to know which way the fabric needs to go? Because maybe you have a scrap like this and you don't have the selvage to tell you which is which. If you take a look at this piece of fabric, you're going to notice that it has a selvage on it, and the selvage is the length of grain. Okay, so way you can tell which fabric, which side is the length of grain, if you snap it, you can hear it's kind of like a higher pitch sound. When you go cross grain, it's a lower pitch. So you can even do that with small pieces of fabric. You hear that? So you got a higher pitch and a lower pitch. So this is my straight of grain. So I want that way to be going into the machine. Okay. Now another thing that's really neat about this is that you don't just do one piece of fabric. No, you can do 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of quilting cotton through the machine at one time. So you're going to be, got to turn him back on. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're going to send the 6 layers of fabric through here all at the same time, and that's going to give us 6 perfectly cut shapes of whatever it is that you want to cut. The dies come in a whole different array of different styles, and we're going to talk about some of those. Okay, so here is our squares. So we've got the 6 squares all ready to go. Now, if you like to do applique, you can do that as well because those shaped dies. So now if you're going to be doing applique and you have fusible on it, count that as a layer. Okay, so you might do 3 layers of fabric for an applique if you have fusible on it. So just bear that in mind. The thicker the fabric, the fewer layers that you will want to do. So if you're doing denim, yeah, probably only 1 if it's a heavy denim. And look at how cute our little heart is. And I didn't have my mat all the way, so I have a hanging Chad on my little guy here. So make sure you don't do what I did. I'll show you what I did. My mat ended right there. Make sure it's all the way to the end of your board so that you'll cut that. Okay, so now let's talk about another fun thing that you can do with your dies. So if we are working with like half square triangles and we want to sew those together, let's say we're putting a quilt together. I'm going to take my orange piece, and then I'm gonna do an orange and black quilt. And I'm gonna take my black piece and layer that on there, and then an orange and a black. And of course we can do this 6 times. And this is a value die, so it has the multiple different shapes on it. A lot of dies will have just all half square triangles or all hearts or circles or whatever the case may be. So now I have 6 layers and they're alternating. And you would put them right sides together. So if it's a print, make sure that you put the prints together and then another set with the prints together. Because what you're going to be able to do is take them right from your cutter here. Take them right from here and take these little stacks right over to your machine, and they're ready to sew. You just pick up, can't pick anything up when you're live on camera, right? Then you pick up the 2 and they're ready to stitch together, and they would be right sides together. So you just go right on and stitch those out. Okay, so now, what is the most popular die that there is? I'm going to show you. It's pretty fabulous. It is the 2.5-inch strip die. This is the most popular die. It makes great binding, sashings, borders, all sorts of different things. And it has some markings on it that you're going to want to notice. This is habit. You could turn it either way. I'm just used to have this side going into my machine. So right up here, there is a line, and this is the boundary. There's no blades past this line. And then down here, the blades go all the way down to here. So this would be the end. I consider this the top of the board, and this the end. And then we have angles at 60, 45, 30, and then a 90. And I'll show you what those are for here in a minute. So we're going to go ahead and cut some fabric. So what you're going to do is take the fold of your fabric and lay it parallel with that line, but don't cross over it because there's no blades on that side. Now remember, before you do any cutting with any of your dies, you want to press your fabric because the machine's not going to do that for you. So make sure you press that. And then I'm going to fold this over, and I'm going to only do 4 layers today because this is flannel and it's thicker. So I'm not going to, I don't want to exceed my limit of my 6 layers. And then I'm going to pop the mat on top of there, and let's send this through. So now as this goes through, you're going to see how nice and clean it cuts. But there's all different widths of strip cutters that you can get. The 2.5 just happens to be the most popular one. And when you get a strip cutter, make sure you get a mat to go with it, because the mat is very important. You can't do it without the mat. And you also never want to do a big mat on a little. You want to have the right size mat for your board. Okay, so we're going to give it a little bit of love here, and we're going to remove that. And I'm going to go ahead and take off our selvage. Now this is a little bit, this fabric was a little bit longer than normal, so it didn't trim quite down to the edge there because of, well, there's a pick but no scissors. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm just gonna break that off just so you can see. So just know, if you have whatever's hanging past the blades isn't gonna cut. But now I have these perfectly cut strips that are 2.5 inches wide, and they're ready to go into a project. And what's really cool is that they don't have those weird elbows in them. They're perfectly straight and ready to go. Now let's talk about other things that you can do on this board. So remember how I mentioned that there's a 90-degree line, and there's also the 60, 45, and 30-degree line. Let's look at the 60-degree. Maybe we want to do diamonds. So I'm going to place this just so it's just going to get cut off there. The end gets cut off by the blade. And I'm just going to do one, because one piece of that's 4 layers. That's all that I need to do on that because of the thickness of the fabric. And I'll just align another one right with it, and they can be friends there. Now, if you want to make oodles of squares that are perfect 2.5-inch squares, all you have to do is lay it right across. And if this was regular quilting cotton, I would bring this edge back on, but it's flannel, so I'm not going to do that because I don't want it to be too thick or heavy. So that's good. You could load up your whole die with the strips going 90 degrees, 30 degrees, or whatever you want to do. But when you cut them, you're going to get these great angles. So the strip cutters are extremely versatile because you're going to be able to do star quilts, quilt blocks. You're going to be able to do, like I said, mounds and mounds of squares all at one time. So as it finishes, all right, perfect. All right, so static electricity. But now I have these perfect little diamonds. So let me pull some of them off of here real quick so I can arrange them so you can kind of see what you're gonna get. I got just big stacks, but you would just do 1 layer at a time. And then you have a star that you can stitch together and have the perfect star. And then of course, squares, we use those all the time. So those are fabulous to use. So that's all with the strip die. Now, what about bias? Bias is a tricky thing, right? And we all want to make perfect bias strips. So let's talk about that for a minute. So if you're going to do bias, you can certainly do it on your board. What you're going to want to do is take your fabric, and I've cut this at 18 inches wide. And then you're going to want to cut off the selvage, which I have not done here, but you'd want to do that, and press it so you get rid of the hard crease in the middle. And then fold up one side so you have the bias. Now, what is bias? I should mention that. So remember, we have the length of grain going with the selvage. Cross grain is going this way. At a 45 degree is bias, and it's really stretchy. So while most of our quilts, you would just do a regular straight of grain for the bias binding like I just did with the strawberry fabric. But if you have any curves or shaping around the edge of a quilt, or maybe you want to do an applique of vines, or maybe you want to put bias binding around a tote bag or around a collar or cuff, you may need it to be able to be flexible, or a neckline. You need that flexibility. So with that, bias is your friend, because that way it will smoothly go around the corners. So you want to take and fold up a triangle on one end. And I went from away from me toward me. And now I'm going to go to the one closest to me and away from me. So I have a little guy that looks like this. And then you want to press it. So I took this to an iron and I pressed it really well. So here is my little parallelogram, okay? And what you want to do is take one of the folded edges and lay it right along, just on the other side of the blade. So it's gonna cut off your folded edge, because we're going for perfectly parallel strips of fabric. And if we are not paying attention, we'll end up with a really wide one. So that's not what we want to do. Okay, so then I'm going to take the other, this piece, we have the other fold, and I'm going to fold that so it matches. So now I have like a burrito. Let me see if I can tip that. So I've taken that other fold and matched that fold line. And now I'm going to slide it down so I get most of the folds on my board. Okay, get it all straightened back up. And then you just want to fold in our layers here. And you don't want to go outside of your, you don't want to do more layers than stick 6. So you want to make sure that you are paying attention to that. So right here I have 2 and 4, so I'm only 4 layers. And then I want to do the same thing on this side. And so it looks a little bit like an envelope when it's all folded up. Okay, so you've taken and aligned the fold on one side, then you fold up the other side and fold your ends in, making sure that you don't have more than 6 layers of fabric in any one spot. So now we'll run this through. And you'll be able to get miles and miles of bias binding all at one time. So that's a pretty cool tip there, things that you can do with it. Now let's talk about other dies and things that you can do. So what die would you want to get to combine with your strip cutter? All right, so here this guy is. All right. So I'm going to get rid of the extra side pieces first because they're not part of our deal, but we have these great bias strips, and they're cute when you're working with stripe, because then you get a really cute kind of a stripy edge to them, and they have a lot of stretch to them. So you have all different types of lengths in here, and you're just going to stitch them together as you would any bias strip. Binding strip, you just piece them together, and then you have tons and tons of bias binding. Okay, so let's go back to talking about what kind of dies would be a good combination to work with a strip cutter and the cutters. The best thing to do is to get a cube. A cube is a set of 8 dies that go together to make a quilt block. And these quilt blocks are, the size of them is designated on the box. This is a 9-inch block. Okay, so they come in sizes 6, 8, 9, 10, and 12. So the shapes are all the same in all the different cubes. What the difference is the end size of the finished block. So in here you have the 8 different dies plus a lesson tutorial DVD, a pattern book, and a cutting mat for the cubes that are, the dies that are in your cube. And they come in this great storage container. So in here you have 8 different dies, and these 8 different dies go together to make 72 different quilt blocks. Now I'm sure they can do more than 72. I think they just quit counting at 72. So you can get a ton of different block styles, and you're not limited to just what that one die does that you purchased, because this has a great versatility to it. So which one do you get? Get the one that makes the most sense to you. If you love making 10-inch blocks, then that's the cube you should get. If you like making bigger, the 12-inch, then that's the one you should get. If you like small ones, like a 6-inch, then get that one. Or if you're like me and you can't decide, just get them all. And then you can mix and match and make sampler quilts with big blocks and small blocks. And that makes my heart happy, so that's what I did. The last thing I want to tell you about is something called a bob, a block on board. So let me pull this one as an example. This is the chimney sweep die, and it is a block on board, a bob. And what it does is all the pieces that are needed to make that block come on this one board. So you can do things like that one. We also have winding ways, or I'm sorry, glorified 9-patch. I'm sorry. This one. You have the one on the table here is the Storm at Sea. So all the pieces are in one, on one die. So you can make the specialty blocks that you want to do. So come into one of our stores, take a look at the system, and see which will work best for you. Maybe it's the hand crank, maybe it's the electric, and get sewing a little bit faster, because you're going to have perfectly accurately cut fabric, no dog ears, and your points will be perfect.